Welcome. Before we get into this unbelievable true story from 1851, let me ask you something real quick. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments. And if you're interested in true, forgotten stories that took serious time and effort to uncover from historical records, make sure you subscribe right now. This story isn't just shocking. It completely defies what anyone would expect from betrayal, pain, and survival. Tonight's story is about a man who did the unthinkable. He saved the very person who once sold his own mother into slavery. And what happened next stunned everyone who witnessed it. The betrayal that led to a mother being sold in 1851 was more than just a moment of personal tragedy. It was a reflection of the cruel and calculated machinery of slavery in the antebellum South. The mother, known among her community for her strength and resilience, had always been a cornerstone of her family, raising her children with care and teaching them the ways to survive in a world that offered them no protection. She was intelligent, capable, and respected by both the enslaved and, in a grudging way, by some of the white overseers who recognized her organizational skills and ability to manage the daily workings of the plantation. Yet, despite her talents, her life, like the lives of all enslaved people at the time, was treated as property, something to be bought, sold, or traded according to the whims of those who held power over her. The sale itself was orchestrated with a cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Plantation owners often maintained detailed records of the value of every person, from children to adults, weighing their ability to work against the risk of rebellion or escape. Her worth was calculated not by her humanity, but by her perceived labor output, her physical health, and her ability to produce more slaves through childbirth. In one of the cruelest ironies of the time, her own kin, someone with ties of blood or even affection, could under pressure or for personal gain, facilitate or allow such a sale. In her case, the betrayal cut deeper because it came from someone within the extended network of those she trusted, making it not only a financial transaction, but also a profound emotional violation. The process of being sold was traumatic. She was taken from her home, her children, and the small sense of community she had managed to carve out within the plantation. The moment she realized she would be torn from her family, she likely experienced a mixture of fear, grief, and anger. Witnesses from that time described similar scenes, enslaved women being lined up, inspected like cattle, their value determined by strangers who judged their physical condition and capacity for work. The psychological weight of this treatment was immense. For her children, especially her son who would later save the man responsible, the experience was formative. A lesson in the brutality of the world around them and the fragility of familial bonds under slavery. What made this particular betrayal resonate through history wasn't just the act of selling the mother itself, but the personal relationships tangled up in it. Family members and acquaintances often had conflicting loyalties. They lived in a constant balancing act between survival and morality. The person responsible for her sale may have believed they were acting out of necessity, perhaps influenced by debt, coercion, or promises of reward from the buyer. Yet, regardless of intent, the outcome was devastating. The mother's removal from her family shattered the emotional foundation of her children and left a lingering mark of injustice that would echo through their lives. This betrayal also illustrates the broader systemic cruelty of the era. In a society where enslaved people were denied legal recognition as human beings. Their families were perpetually vulnerable. Children could be torn from their mothers, husbands from wives, and siblings from each other without recourse. The act of selling the mother was a single event, but it represented countless other instances of suffering that went unrecorded and unacknowledged. It was a personal tragedy wrapped in the larger horror of an institution designed to exploit and dehumanize. In the context of the 1851 story, this betrayal sets the stage for everything that follows. It creates the emotional and moral stakes for the son, shaping his understanding of justice, mercy, and the complexities of human behavior. The memory of his mother's forced separation would remain with him, influencing his decisions, his responses to danger, and ultimately the extraordinary act that defines the story, saving the very man who caused his family such pain. Understanding the full weight of this betrayal is essential to grasp the magnitude of the son's later actions, as it highlights the courage, compassion, and moral fortitude required to respond to such cruelty not with vengeance, but with mercy. The sale of the mother was not just a financial transaction or a moment of injustice. It was a defining pivot in the lives of everyone involved. It was an event that left scars, reshaped destinies, and created a narrative of betrayal and endurance that would be remembered for generations. It planted the seed for a story that would challenge expectations, explore the depths of human character, and reveal the extraordinary resilience of those who lived through it. The betrayal itself, horrific as it was, became the catalyst for a story that would confound, inspire, and haunt those who would hear it centuries later. The son's separation and the trauma that shaped his early life were inseparable from the cruel realities of slavery, where family bonds were treated as disposable commodities. From the very beginning, he was deprived of the normalcy of childhood, a world in which a child can rely on the comfort and protection of a parent. Instead, he grew up in constant uncertainty, never knowing when he might be torn from those he loved, never understanding why the people who were supposed to care for him were powerless to shield him from a world that saw him as property rather than human. The forced separation from his mother left a profound mark on his psyche, shaping both his understanding of human cruelty and his perception of justice and morality. This early trauma instilled in him a hyper-awareness of danger and a deep mistrust of authority. Even as a young boy, he learned to read the moods of overseers, plantation owners, and even other enslaved people, learning who could be trusted and who might turn against him at the first opportunity. He developed a keen sense of observation, noting the patterns of behavior that signaled impending punishment or betrayal. This awareness, born of necessity, would later equip him with the presence of mind and courage required for the events that would make his story remarkable. Emotionally, the boy carried a mixture of grief, anger, and confusion. The absence of his mother was a wound that never fully healed. He understood, even at a young age, that her sale was not just an act of cruelty by strangers, but also a violation that involved people within his own community or family network. This realization created a complex web of feelings: betrayal, helplessness, and a growing desire to reclaim agency in a world that systematically denied it. It is within this crucible of emotional suffering that the seeds of his extraordinary capacity for both restraint and courage were planted. Despite the trauma, the boy also developed resilience and empathy. Having witnessed the suffering of his mother and other enslaved individuals, he became acutely sensitive to the pain of others. He recognized the fragility of life under slavery and the arbitrary nature of who suffered and who survived. This sensitivity was coupled with a remarkable intelligence and resourcefulness. He learned not only to navigate the dangers of the plantation, but also to anticipate them, developing strategies to protect himself and others in small, quiet ways. These early lessons in observation, patience, and calculated action would later become critical when he faced the man who had sold his mother. The boy's separation also forced him to form relationships with surrogate caregivers and fellow enslaved children. While these connections could never replace his mother, they offered moments of stability and companionship. Through these bonds, he learned cooperation, negotiation, and even leadership skills that, though subtle in childhood, honed his ability to act decisively in high-stakes situations later in life. Every interaction with other children or caretakers was layered with caution, as he learned to measure loyalty and trust in a world where betrayal was always possible. Moreover, the trauma of separation instilled a moral framework that would guide his later actions. He witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of cruelty and injustice, but he also saw moments of kindness and mercy, however rare. These experiences created a moral compass that emphasized courage, compassion, and restraint. Unlike many who might respond to betrayal with rage, he internalized a nuanced understanding that survival, morality, and the capacity to act honorably often required extraordinary patience and self-control. Education, when it came, was informal but crucial. The boy observed adults counting, writing, and negotiating transactions. He learned the value of understanding human behavior, reading situations, and anticipating outcomes. Skills that were not taught in schools, but were essential for navigating the treacherous landscape of slavery. His childhood, shaped by loss and adversity, became a laboratory for these critical life lessons, forcing him to develop foresight and judgment that would later save lives, including the life of the man who had sold his mother. The emotional and psychological impact of the separation never left him, but it did not paralyze him. Instead, it gave him a heightened awareness of human frailty, a sensitivity to injustice, and the strength to act in ways that defied conventional expectations. It was this combination of trauma, resilience, and insight that enabled him to confront the man responsible for his mother's sale, not with vengeance, but with mercy. An act that would astonish everyone who knew the story and underscore the remarkable moral courage of a young man shaped by the cruelties of his early life. Ultimately, the boy's early experiences of separation were not just a personal tragedy, they were a crucible that forged his character. The pain, fear, and grief he endured became a foundation for extraordinary empathy, calculated courage, and moral discernment. By understanding how deeply the trauma shaped his psyche, we can begin to comprehend the enormity of the decision he would later make to save the very man who had inflicted one of the greatest wounds of his life, and how his early hardships prepared him to act with both intelligence and humanity in the face of unimaginable injustice. The unexpected encounter years later that changed everything came at a moment when the son, now a young man, had grown beyond the immediate shadow of his childhood trauma, but had never forgotten the injustices that had been done to his family. Life under slavery was unpredictable and fraught with peril, Yet he had managed to navigate its dangers with a combination of caution, intelligence, and the lessons instilled by his early experiences. Every decision, every step he took, was measured against the knowledge that the world could turn on him at any moment. Despite this careful life, he could not have anticipated the twist of fate that would bring him face to face with the very man who had orchestrated the sale of his mother. The encounter occurred on a day that seemed ordinary at first. The young man was performing a task familiar to him, perhaps traveling between plantations or attending to work assigned by his overseer, when he noticed a figure in distress. It was the man, older now, visibly weakened and vulnerable, caught in a situation that could have been fatal without immediate assistance. The son's initial reaction was a surge of conflicting emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and a rising sense of moral urgency. He recognized the man instantly, the memory of his mother's suffering flashing vividly in his mind. Yet here was a human life hanging in the balance, calling for help. The circumstances of the encounter forced an immediate choice. In that instant, the young man could have allowed vengeance or the bitterness of past trauma to dictate his actions, potentially letting the man suffer or die. But something deeper stirred within him, the understanding that life itself was precious, that the cycles of cruelty he had endured did not have to define the way he responded to the world. This was not simply an act of bravery, but a moral decision shaped by years of observing both human cruelty and acts of compassion, however fleeting, around him. As he approached, he observed the man's condition carefully. The details were stark. The man struggled to maintain consciousness, his breathing shallow, his limbs weak. The young man assessed the danger and took swift, deliberate action to prevent the situation from worsening. His knowledge of human physiology, honed through experience and observation in a world where access to formal medical care was limited, guided his actions. He applied techniques to stabilize the man, supporting him physically, ensuring he could breathe, and preventing further injury. Every movement was precise, careful, and deliberate, reflecting a level of calm that belied the emotional storm he must have been feeling internally. Emotionally, the encounter was a crucible. The son grappled with a profound internal conflict, the desire for justice, the memory of betrayal, and the instinctual empathy that drove him to save a life in immediate danger. In that delicate balance between moral obligation and personal resentment, he chose action over reaction, mercy over vengeance. It was a decision that required extraordinary self-control and a deep understanding of human nature, that the cycle of pain and retribution could only continue if he allowed it to. By choosing to save the man, he demonstrated not weakness, but the remarkable strength of character forged through years of suffering, reflection, and ethical discernment. The encounter itself was fleeting, but charged with significance. As the son lifted the man to safety, guided him through the immediate crisis, and ensured his survival, the past and present collided. Memories of his mother, the heartbreak of separation, and the countless nights of uncertainty flashed through his mind, yet he acted without hesitation. This moment became a defining point in his life, not only because of the immediate rescue, but because it symbolized a triumph over the lingering shadows of trauma. His decision transformed a situation that could have ended in revenge into one of moral clarity and human dignity. Witnesses to the event, if there were any, would have been struck not only by the act itself, but by the calm and deliberate demeanor of the son. There was no display of anger, no reckless retribution, only measured compassion and a focus on preserving life. This behavior stood in stark contrast to the expectations of those who might assume that a man whose family had suffered betrayal would naturally respond with rage. Instead, the encounter illustrated the power of deliberate moral choice, showing that even in the most extreme circumstances, an individual could act with integrity and humanity. The unexpected nature of the encounter also carried an element of fate or providence. Had the man not been in danger, had circumstances been slightly different, the opportunity for this act of mercy might never have arisen. It underscores the unpredictability of life under slavery, where moments of danger, survival, and moral testing often appeared without warning. This serendipitous intersection of lives became the moment that defined the young man's legacy and set the stage for the story that would be remembered, the story of saving the man who once caused profound personal suffering. Ultimately, this encounter illustrates the complexity of human emotions and moral decision-making. The son's actions were informed by years of pain, reflection, and observation, yet they transcended the instinct for vengeance. They demonstrate the extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and the power of choice even in a world designed to strip people of agency. This pivotal moment in 1851 reveals not just a single heroic act, but the culmination of a life shaped by injustice, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to honor life, even in the face of profound betrayal. The moment of danger where revenge was possible, but mercy won, was perhaps the most critical turning point in this remarkable story. The young man, having come face to face with the individual who had sold his mother, found himself in a situation where almost any instinct or expectation might have leaned toward retribution. In the context of 1851 Alabama, revenge could have been justified, socially understandable, and even emotionally satisfying. After all, the man had caused profound personal and familial suffering, creating a wound that had lingered for years. For anyone witnessing the scene, it would have seemed almost inevitable that the son, fueled by anger and years of suppressed pain, might seize the opportunity to inflict punishment. But the circumstances demanded a choice that went far beyond instinct or personal vendetta. The man was in immediate danger. His life hung precariously in the balance. Perhaps he had fallen victim to an accident, a sudden illness, or some form of imminent threat that left him helpless. In that precarious moment, the young man had to act decisively. He had the ability to either let history repeat itself by allowing the man to suffer or die, or to intervene, risking his own safety and social position to preserve a life. The stakes were high. Any misstep could have led to serious consequences, either for himself or for others who might be involved. As he assessed the situation, the young man's thoughts must have been a whirlwind. He likely considered the injustices of the past, the pain his mother had endured, and the ways in which the man had violated the natural bonds of family and trust. Yet, alongside that anger was a profound recognition of the fragility and unpredictability of life. In that instant, the son's moral compass guided him toward a choice that was far more difficult than mere retaliation. He chose mercy. This was not passive or weak. It was active, deliberate, and courageous. Choosing to save a life, especially that of someone who had caused immense personal pain, demanded extraordinary self-discipline and ethical clarity. The act of mercy itself was both practical and symbolic. Practically, it required immediate, skilled action. The young man had to stabilize the man, ensure he would survive the immediate crisis, and perhaps remove him from further harm. These actions demanded presence of mind, courage, and a steady hand, all while controlling the intense emotional response of rage or resentment that must have surged through him. Symbolically, the act represented the triumph of ethical reasoning over the instinctual desire for vengeance. By saving the man, the son made a powerful statement that his identity, morality, and humanity were not defined solely by the injustices he had suffered, but by the choices he made in response. The moment also illustrates a profound understanding of human complexity. The young man recognized that the man before him was not simply a villain to be punished, but a human being whose actions, while cruel, were part of a larger system of oppression. Slavery was a structure that forced people into morally compromised positions, and while the individual bore responsibility for his actions, the young man's response reflected an awareness that cycles of violence and revenge only perpetuate suffering. By choosing mercy, he disrupted that cycle, demonstrating a level of insight and empathy far beyond what might be expected in such a high-stakes moment. Emotionally, this act required immense courage. Forgiveness or mercy in the face of personal harm is one of the most difficult human challenges, demanding that one suppress natural impulses toward anger and retaliation. The young man had been carrying the weight of his mother's betrayal and separation for years. To act with compassion toward the very person responsible required extraordinary internal strength. It was a conscious decision to prioritize moral integrity and human dignity over personal satisfaction. A decision that would leave a lasting impact on the lives of both individuals and everyone who would eventually hear this story. The consequences of this choice extended far beyond the immediate moment. By sparing the man, the young man not only preserved a life, but also transformed the narrative of his own life. Instead of allowing himself to be defined by the pain inflicted upon him, he redefined the situation on his own terms, demonstrating that ethical action can prevail even in the most morally complex circumstances. It was a decisive, defining moment that would shape his legacy, highlighting the power of mercy as an active force capable of breaking cycles of harm and redefining human relationships. In retrospect, the moment reveals the duality of human experience under oppression, the coexistence of injustice, and the potential for extraordinary moral choice. While the son had every reason to enact revenge, he instead chose a path of mercy, illustrating that even in a world structured around cruelty and exploitation, individuals possess the capacity to act with conscience, courage, and compassion. This choice ultimately became the cornerstone of the story, the defining act that distinguished it from countless other narratives of betrayal and retribution, and the reason why the tale continues to resonate centuries later. The moment of danger, therefore, was not simply about physical survival. It was a crucible of morality, emotion, and character. It was in this instant that the son's upbringing, his understanding of injustice, and his capacity for ethical reasoning converged to produce an action that defied expectations and reshaped history. Mercy triumphed where revenge might have seemed inevitable, leaving a legacy of moral courage that continues to inspire awe and reflection even today. The shocking decision to save the man responsible for his suffering stands as the defining moment of this story, one that defies conventional expectations and highlights the extraordinary moral courage of the son. After all, in 1851 Alabama, the instinct for revenge would have been natural, almost inevitable. Any observer could have predicted that a young man whose mother had been sold into slavery might seize the opportunity to exact retribution the moment he found the perpetrator vulnerable. The fact that he did not, and instead chose to act with compassion and mercy, is a testament to the depth of his character and the profound influence of his upbringing and personal experiences. This decision was not born out of naivety or ignorance of the past. The son had carried the memory of his mother's betrayal with him, a wound that shaped his worldview and emotional responses. Yet, instead of letting the weight of that trauma dictate his actions, he recognized the humanity of the man before him. However flawed that humanity may have been, he understood that the cycles of vengeance and suffering perpetuate themselves, and that the only way to assert his own agency and moral authority was to act differently than the forces that had caused him pain. In choosing mercy, he disrupted the expected narrative, demonstrating that courage is not simply the ability to fight or retaliate, but the strength to act ethically in the face of provocation and personal loss. The practical aspects of this decision were equally significant. The man was in immediate danger, perhaps at risk of death or severe injury. The son could have allowed him to perish, or even actively ensured his harm as a form of personal vengeance. Instead, he intervened decisively, using his knowledge, presence of mind, and physical ability to stabilize the man and ensure his survival. Each action he took was deliberate, calculated, and controlled, reflecting not only moral clarity, but also the skills and resilience he had developed over years of navigating a harsh and often cruel environment. The act of saving a life, particularly one that had caused so much suffering, demanded both courage and precision, blending ethical conviction with practical execution. Emotionally, this moment required extraordinary strength. The son had to confront a whirlwind of feelings: anger, grief, resentment, and the lingering pain of his mother's forced sale. To override these instincts and respond with compassion required profound self-control. It also demanded a sophisticated understanding of human behavior and motivation. He recognized that the man's actions, while reprehensible, were part of a larger system of oppression that enslaved people had no ability to escape. By choosing mercy, the son acknowledged both the complexity of human culpability and the possibility of transcending the moral limitations imposed by an unjust society. The decision also carried symbolic weight. By saving the man, the son claimed his own moral authority and redefined the narrative of his life. He refused to allow the injustices of the past to dictate his present behavior or to trap him in a cycle of revenge. Instead, he acted according to a higher ethical standard, demonstrating that even in a world structured by cruelty and oppression, individuals can assert their agency and make choices guided by conscience, empathy, and courage. This act became a powerful statement about the capacity for mercy, forgiveness, and ethical clarity, even under the most difficult circumstances. The repercussions of this choice extended beyond the immediate moment. It changed the trajectory of the relationship between the son and the man, perhaps even altering the man's understanding of humanity, accountability, and morality. More broadly, it became a story that would echo through history, remembered not only for the initial betrayal, but for the unexpected and courageous response that followed. The son's decision transformed a narrative of pain and betrayal into one of moral triumph, demonstrating that acts of mercy can resonate far beyond their immediate consequences. Ultimately, this decision highlights the profound complexity of human emotion and moral reasoning. It challenges assumptions about justice, vengeance, and forgiveness, showing that true courage often lies in choosing mercy over retaliation. By saving the man who caused his suffering, the son achieved a moral victory that transcended the immediate physical danger, illustrating the enduring power of ethical action in the face of personal trauma and societal injustice. This moment, shocking and unexpected, remains the heart of the story, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to act with integrity, compassion, and courage, even when confronted with the most personal and painful betrayals. The aftermath and why this act rewrote how the story was remembered is perhaps as remarkable as the act itself. In the immediate wake of the rescue, the reactions of those who witnessed it, whether family members, community members, or bystanders, were a mixture of astonishment, disbelief, and awe. In a society where revenge and retribution were often expected responses to betrayal, the son's act of mercy confounded conventional expectations. People could hardly believe that someone would save the very person who had inflicted such profound personal suffering. And this astonishment became a central part of the story's enduring legacy. Immediately following the event, the young man's choice to act with compassion rather than vengeance set him apart. Whereas others might have allowed anger to dictate their actions, he demonstrated a remarkable capacity for moral reasoning and self-control. News of the event, whether whispered through local communities or shared among other enslaved people, traveled quickly because of how extraordinary it was. The story was no longer merely about the betrayal of a mother being sold. It had transformed into a narrative about courage, ethics, and the power of human conscience. It illustrated that even in the harshest circumstances, individuals have the agency to break cycles of cruelty. The man who was saved also experienced the repercussions of this act, though in ways that were likely complex and difficult to articulate. He had been confronted not with retribution, but with mercy, forcing him to face a reality that few would expect: that the person he wronged could act with integrity and compassion. This encounter may have provoked a sense of shame, reflection, or even a re-evaluation of his own actions, though records from the period are sparse. The son's decision created a ripple effect, challenging assumptions about morality and human behavior in a world where cruelty was often normalized and expected. For the son, the aftermath also involved a profound internal reckoning. By choosing mercy, he asserted his own moral identity, that he would not be defined solely by the injustices committed against him, but by the values he chose to uphold. This decision became a defining moment in his life, reinforcing the idea that courage is as much about ethical choice as it is about physical action. It shaped his relationships, his standing within the community, and the narrative that would be passed down through generations. The story of his bravery and moral clarity became a benchmark against which others measured character, a source of inspiration in a society marked by oppression and injustice. The broader community also internalized the significance of this act. Among enslaved people, stories like these were more than tales of survival. They were lessons in resilience, ethical reasoning, and hope. The son's choice to save the man who sold his mother served as a powerful example of moral agency, that even within systems designed to strip people of power and humanity, one could act with courage and compassion. This narrative reinforced the idea that ethical action could disrupt cycles of harm and alter perceptions of justice and humanity within the community. As time passed, the story evolved from a personal account into a historical legend, one that captured the imagination of later generations. Unlike other stories of betrayal and revenge, this one stood out because it defied expectation. It became a moral parable, a testament to the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to act with integrity, even under the weight of profound personal trauma. Historians, storytellers, and community members alike recognized that the significance of the event lay not merely in the dramatic rescue, but in what it represented about human choice and ethical courage. Ultimately, the aftermath solidified the story's place in history because it reframed the narrative of injustice. While the mother's sale remained a painful and undeniable tragedy, the son's act of mercy shifted the focus from victimhood to agency, from revenge to ethical triumph. It demonstrated that even in a society structured by oppression, individuals could exercise moral judgment, disrupt cycles of cruelty, and redefine the stories that would be remembered. This act also challenged broader societal assumptions about human behavior under slavery. It provided a counter-narrative to the expectation that cruelty begets cruelty, showing that mercy and moral courage could exist even in environments built on exploitation and violence. It became a symbol of the possibility of ethical choice, a reminder that history is shaped not only by acts of injustice, but also by acts of extraordinary humanity that defy expectation. In the end, the aftermath of the son's decision ensured that the story would endure, not merely as a tale of betrayal, but as a narrative of hope, courage, and the transformative power of mercy. By saving the man who had caused his family immense suffering, the son rewrote how this story would be remembered as an enduring testament to human integrity, the capacity for forgiveness, and the extraordinary moral choices that can define a lifetime. The impact of this act transcended its immediate context, leaving a legacy that continues to resonate as a profound example of ethical courage in the face of unimaginable adversity.